Folks, I want to thank everybody for attending today's session. It is our session with Avalara, part of our professional services series webinars. My name is Brian Weaver. I'm the Vice President of Sales with NSA. I'd like to welcome our great vendor partner, Avalara, to today's session. They are going to talk about a lot of the sales tax changes that have taken place. We find that it's really appropriate right now, especially with what's happened with a year of COVID. There's been a ton of changes. There always are changes, but I think a lot more in the past year. And we've got some very seasoned folks that are on with us today to do the presentation. Our primary presenter today is Antonio Nera, and I'll give you a little bit of information on Antonio. So Antonio spent the last 20 plus years in technology specific to manufacturing and distribution. Prior to that, he was 3 years with Infor, so he has experience with Infor as well. So he's certainly well versed in ERP operational functionality for our distributor accounts. And for the last 9 years, he's been at Avalara, and he's been dedicated to helping Infor ERP users learn how to automate their tax compliance environments, so they can focus more time and energy on their business and becoming more profitable. So with that, Antonio, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning if you're in Pacific time zone. Let's talk about the agenda, what we'll be covering today. And really, we're going to talk about COVID-19, the challenges, the impact of COVID-19, how it has affected businesses. We're going to also talk about 5 ways the states are tweaking things, changing things to increase revenue. So some sales tax changes. We're also going to touch point in a couple of main areas for manufacturing and the retail and e-commerce. And finally, talk about what solutions are out there, how technology can make things easier for businesses to stay compliant, to improve their process, etc. And then we'll have a small Q&A. So if you have questions, you can put them on the chat. We'll try to get those answers as soon as possible. If it's something that we can all benefit from it, then we can discuss those after this webinar. So with that said, let's talk about the impact of COVID-19. In a very high level, what has changed? Well, has affected pretty much everything, right? from workplace to the way the businesses are being done. Everything has been affected because of the lockdown. A lot of brick and mortar stores had to be creative in the ways that they stay in business. Remote deliveries, launching e-commerce portals. That's a big one. I've talked to a lot of clients that are launching this e-commerce portal just in order really to close that gap that they've seen with COVID. Tax relief programs have been implemented from different states, deferments, a lot of things. And we're going to narrow and talk about all these changes that has happened in the world of sales tax. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, but let's go by the numbers. I think the numbers will speak for themselves. So if we talk about online sales, right? CNBC posted a review back in the mid-2020s last year, and they reported that 98,000 businesses had to close down. That's a lot. Now, I mentioned before that businesses had to be creative in ways to present the products to their customers. And there was a 63% in more online buying, online purchases. There was a 14% expected decrease in brick and mortar retail. So a lot of businesses had to change with this COVID issue pandemic that we had. And I've spoken with many customers that had this project, e-commerce, in the roadmap for 3-4 years, and they had to accelerate it, do something quickly, just to stay in business. And I've also spoken with a lot of clients that have been overwhelmed with the number of sales that have come through from the e-commerce site. Now, this is not going to be a conversation of e-commerce, although it has affected a lot of businesses right now. We'll be talking about other areas as well. In fact, talking about e-commerce though, Forbes posted a Cyber Monday, this 2020 Cyber Monday. They had $10.8 billion in sales. That is in a single day. And that was an increase of 15% over previous years, the previous 2019 numbers. So as you can see by the numbers, we're seeing an increase. We're seeing a lot of changes, a lot of the shifting of the market world from brick and mortar, placing something online, going to the store, to actually doing things remotely. And a lot of customers are expecting businesses to have something available for this type of method. Talking about the 5 ways that states are doing to increase their revenues or trying to enforce, right? Now, a lot of these changes are carryover from the last 2 or 3 years. But great states, as you know, they're creative. They're coming up with new ways as well. They're always changing things, right? So number 1 is the changing of product taxability rules. States are trying to modify items that were at one time exempt from sales tax to be taxable, like in this example, groceries and digital services. Now, Avalara is a SaaS company, software as a service. So when we sell a product or services in Washington, it is taxable. If it's sold in California, it's exempt. If it's sold in Texas, it's an 80-20 rule, 80% taxable, 20% non-taxable. Now, 5 years ago, if you look at 5 years ago, there are only 4 states that would tax digital services. Now, 25 states are taxing digital services. States are noticing that there's a significant revenue being lost by exempting certain items. So they're trying to pass new laws to tax those items. In 2020, there are a couple examples right here. In 2020, states accelerated the ways products should be taxed. In Wyoming, for example, Wyoming reported that they will face losses of about $1.5 billion in energy and other revenue over the next 2 years, 2020 and 2021, due to the COVID pandemic and the changes, of course, to the oil and gas market, which is basically Wyoming's one of the legacy industries, right? The other states, Maryland, Nebraska, New York, and Washington, D.C., proposed changes to digital advertising. None of them passed, gladly, right, to some of us. But it really shows a good example of how business or how states are changing things, are seeing what's going on in the world, and then tweaking their tax rules to make those items taxable. So us as businesses, we need to be mindful of that, be aware of those changes, and be ready to apply those changes if they do come through. So product taxability is number 1, right? Items that were exempt at one point could be taxable in a matter of next quarter, depending on what is passed by the rules of the state. So this is probably the biggest impact, uncovering unregistered remote sellers. This was implemented pre-COVID, and I will spend a little more time on this. I have a couple more slides to talk about this specific point, because it is very, very important, and it has affected pretty much every single business in the US. Now, this was implemented, I mentioned before, that it was implemented pre-COVID, but COVID really gave it wings. Definition of physical presence was always changing, right? Interpretation varied from state to state. What was this physical presence? What was Nexus? A Nexus triggering activity, basically the link between a business and the state and the reason why a company should register. Now, back in before 2018, you kind of knew what it was, right? You had to have some type of physical presence, like a building, an employee, a representation, inventory, something that linked you to the state. So it was easy to manage. Then in 2018, with South Dakota versus Wayfair, things changed. Because of that, businesses had to change along with it and be able to be flexible and have a process in place to track those changes and apply the right rules as those states added the rules. So let's talk about some of those right here. I have a map, and I have another map showing you the differences. But basically, 43 states have adopted economic nexus rules since the Wayfair decision. And thresholds vary from state to state. Some of them, they vary about $100,000 $200,000, $500,000. They all vary. Other ones also add the volume of transactions, 100 transactions, 200 transactions. And sometimes it's both. It's $100,000 and 200 transactions. It just depends. It's every single state is slightly different. On this screen, there's some examples of what they're doing. Now, you notice that Missouri is also blue as part of it, but it's not quite yet. In May 14, 2021, just recently, the Missouri passed a law, SB 153, which the governor is widely expected to sign. Now, after signing, Missouri would join the other 42 states and the District of Columbia that have already enacted economic nexus provisions, really making it the final state that imposes sales and use tax to enact also economic nexus provisions. So their rules is $100,000 in the previous or current calendar year. So anybody doing businesses into Missouri here will start have to collect and remit their tax. Now, the big misconception with economic nexus is they think it's just applying to e-commerce sales. Oh, I don't have a website, so I don't have to worry about that. More and more companies are becoming aware that that's not the case. It applies to anyone that delivers products to other states. In our manufacturing and distribution world, that's pretty much everyone, right? We're always delivering the products to pretty much every single state, and sometimes we drop ship on our customers' behalf. So those are things that should be tracked. So I always, when I talk to my clients, I always recommend, hey, are you tracking your sales in every single state? Not just where you have Nexus, but basically where you're delivering. Are you aware of the rules? How are you tracking compared to, are you reaching basically North Dakota's $100,000 threshold or Alabama's $250,000 threshold, etc. Now we have tools with Avalara to help with the tracking of this. And I'll talk about some of the technology about this as well. So this is a great example. June 21st, 2018 is the day that it happened. South Dakota versus Wayfair, right? South Dakota won. So now we have to register. As you can see in the map on the left, just a handful of states were enforcing it, and they basically quickly started applying those rules. Now, pretty much every single state, and as I mentioned, Missouri, is going to happen. I mean, it's already signed, it's already passed. The governor just needs to sign it. Everybody expects that he will. So that's just one more state that would jump on board. And that what's more interesting is Alaska, right? Alaska shows in gray, but they have local sales tax. And some of those locals, they do have requirements. So if you reach a certain threshold, $100,000 in some locations, you have to register. Now, let me go back here. Looking at the time for you to track that $100,000, $200,000, 200 transactions, etc. It also varies by state. Some states will look at the previous calendar year. Other states will look at the trailing 12 months of sales. So it all varies. So it's not just looking at calendar year or a fiscal year or the last 12 months. You have to be mindful of all the different changes. Taxable or exempt, it does matter. A lot of states will look at taxable sales. The majority of states are also looking at exempt sales as part of the threshold. So really just gross revenue or gross sales, I'm sorry, not revenue, but gross sales into state to make the determination. I think I do believe I have a map about that. But talking about the next one, it's marketplaces, right? Adding to the revenue generating footprint, marketplaces are being affected as well. A lot of businesses, they don't care. A lot of states, I mean, they don't care if you're not holding the inventory. By simply becoming a marketplace facilitator, like an Amazon or some place that you become basically this You don't have inventory, you don't have clients, you just basically become the facilitator for this. You are on the hook to collect and report the tax. Now, sellers may still have to register in some locations due to inventory. If you do FBA, fulfilled by Amazon, you may still have to report in a lot of locations where your product or inventory is stored. So be mindful about economic marketplaces. So if a lot of businesses that I talk to are selling on Amazon, are selling on Walmart, and they basically give their products and inventory to Amazon to fulfill and send the products out. Well, in that case, you are probably triggering Nexus in a lot more states than you think you do. I would highly suggest looking at the Seller Central, look where your product or inventory is located, and then look at the state rules for those locations as well, and see if, is this a Nexus trigger activity in that state? Majority of states, it will be. So a lot of companies starting to rethink this idea of marketplaces, pulling away from the whole Amazon, Walmart, starting their own companies. But for some companies, it's appealing, right, to have the millions of customers that will be accessing your products. So pros and cons of both. Either you do that on a local site or you post your products on marketplaces. There are challenges to both scenarios, but just keep that in mind. The governments are starting to look into that and applying rules for marketplace facilitators. This is a big one, consumer's use tax. Every single time that I talk to a customer and I ask them if you're going through an audit, and if the answer is yes, a lot of the time is spent on the use tax of things. The reason why is because it's so complex. It's easy to make mistakes, and auditors can find those mistakes and extrapolate that over the audit period and increasing the liability that is owed. It's complex. Let's say, for example, at Avalara, right, we have offices all over, and we have employees all over, especially with COVID, right? Remote selling, because the remote employees are pretty much in every single state. Let's say that we hire new employees, or we need to deliver laptops to maybe 10 different locations across the US. Those laptops are going to be shipped to those sites. They may be shipped to one location and delivered to all the different sites. So those laptops are going to be used on different locations. The use tax should be applied at the destination for those laptops. So for a business, maybe not laptops, maybe not be the right example, but products may be delivered to different sites. So we need to be aware of the use tax that should be applied to the destination where those products will end up at. And for most businesses, managing this process can be complicated. In this example, right here on the screen, talking about inventory transfers, promotional giveaways, an easy one, everybody does this, pulling from inventory for internal use, and then having to assess the tax for that. Are we trusting that when we buy something that the use tax is accurate? There may be variances from the tax that was applied and the tax that should be reported. So having a process in place to track that and know exactly what the use tax is for any of those items that you have or services, products really, and the relocation of products across the different divisions, it's important. It's really the biggest area that auditors will look at. Now, with COVID shutdown with COVID, a lot of companies had to shut down their locations. A lot of companies had to increase the number of remote employees. Pre-COVID and pre-economic Nexus, I mentioned before, a common Nexus triggering activity is having employees, contractors, or some sort of representation in the state. Now with COVID, we have more and more employees working from home. Many employees would move back home to their hometowns to work remotely. Now, there is a goodwill that states will not look at that as a Nexus triggering activity. The question is, how long is this goodwill going to last? Indiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Mississippi, New Jersey, a lot of the states have said that, you know what, we're going to hold off. We're not going to, a remote employee is not going to trigger Nexus because of COVID. But now we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're basically going to come out of this hopefully soon. What the new normal is going to be, we don't know yet. But the question is, how long is this goodwill going to last? And we should be prepared, because once that ends, are we going to recall our employees? A lot of companies will probably keep the remote working scenario happening. So that if that's the case, Nexus footprint will increase. So other changes, they might not apply to our world, but I still mention it in a very high level as well, right? So local sales tax, there's some tax relief programs out there, tax relief payments and things like that. So commerce is always changing, and the states are always changing with them. Tax reliefs have been introduced in many states, like Wisconsin, right? Lowering the local rates, or maybe introducing tax holidays, but these won't last. The other ones are cigarette, tobacco, baking products. Legalizing marijuana is being considered in a lot of states because it's something that can be bought online. So those areas, this is just an example of how things are changing in the world and how states are changing along with it as well. Now, with a reduction in face-to-face events and activities and moving everything to digital, states, of course, are always paying attention to this. So how many of you have attended a conference in 2020, 2021? It was most likely digital. Doug was digital. Avalara, we're hosting right now an event. It's called Avalara Crush, and you still have access to that data, to the content, until the end of this month. If you want to jump into our type in Google Avalara Crush, and you'll be able to have access to a lot of content, a lot of events, everything focusing on sales tax and sales tax compliance. But just like that is an example of what's going on, right? I mean, we can't meet face to face, so what do we have to do? Well, let's do it online. Now, states are seeing this. It's like, oh, there's money here that we're losing on, right? Virtual events, digital services, streaming. A lot of things are happening that that states are looking at this and saying, there's money to be made. Do we need to be taxed in these scenarios? So just something to be mindful of, that things are changing in the world of digital goods and services as well. Some of this in some states are not taxing digital goods and services, but there will be starting to, especially now with COVID and the way things are going. When we're thinking of tax relief, we think of a waiver of some fees or maybe a reduction of a rate like in the US. In the VAT world, there's a lot of changes happening. Brexit, for example, is a big one as well. There's a portal, and you can see you have access to this as well. You'll be able to get in there as well and view. And it's easier to go to this portal and actually view the global VAT COVID-19 tracker. Prolonging the waiver of customs duties, right? Medical devices and things like that. A relief on corona vaccines and testing kits. There's a lot of information that is happening. This portal, it's too many to mention on this webinar, but the portal will be able to give you access to that. Italy, for example, delaying the pre-filled VAT returns requirements until 2022. There's also a reduction of VAT payments, interest from 9.6% to 4%. UK, for example, extending the hospitality and tourism VAT rate from 5% until September. Then, of course, it's going to go back to 12.5%. In Mexico, VAT credits have been refunded, will be refunded in 15 days instead of 40. There's a lot of content, a lot of changes, a lot of stuff that basically these countries are doing to make things easier during this COVID pandemic that will help you. Highly suggest going to that, looking at the countries that actually you're doing business in, and actually help seeing that there's something in there for you. Again, that's the global VAT COVID-19 tracker. Now we're touching some areas already, but focusing on two specific areas of the manufacturing and distribution space. The first one, with the biggest, is the acceleration of sales to consumer. So a lot of companies had to shift the production. For example, it gives a couple examples right here. A clothing manufacturer producing masks and protective gowns, or distilleries making hand sanitizers. Basically, that's shifting the way you do business into the products. The other one is the Nexus. Nexus triggering activities due to economic selling, selling to more states. Now, because of this increase of B2C, whereas commonly B2B or business-to-business environment, customers want to see a similar experience. Hey, I'm a business, I'm selling to, I want to buy a product. What they'll do is they'll expect the same shopping experience. I want to log into a portal. I want to be able to see exactly, here's my product that I want to buy, but I am exempt. I want to be able to have the ability to exempt those transactions as I do my checkout experience. Businesses are facing with the challenge of making the shopping experience easier, also while gathering the right documents, the exemption certificates that need to be collected during the checkout experience so that we are ensuring that those transactions are exempt from sales tax. So there's a great risk in not tracking the right documents, that those documents that we're tracking may not be the right ones. So also what we're tracking, and this map is perfect for that, is we may be exempt from sales tax, but if you look at it, a lot of states are tracking exempt sales. Only 4 states that I can see right here, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and what is the last one? There's a Nebraska that is basically they exempt sales. They exempt services, exempt sales, but not services. Exempt services, there's a lot more states that do that. But the idea here is to be able to track, report not just taxable sales, but also exempt sales, because a lot of states are tracking that information. Now with COVID-19, it really accelerated the e-commerce expansion, right? I mentioned before that a lot of companies had this as an idea 3, 4, 5 years out to implement some type of e-commerce presence. COVID accelerated that by 5 years. Now, because we're selling into more locations and we're delivering products in more states, that is an area of risk. And we should be looking at that. In the VAT world, this is the same thing, right? So VAT and Brexit, of course, companies that were really delivering products to, let's say, the UK, where the product was valued, what is it, like 135 pounds? Now they have to register in the UK and report their sales as well. So again, it's an increase of sales on the e-commerce side. Companies that are thinking of moving or they're already doing e-commerce transactions, they need to be mindful of that, tracking those sales and be ready to report their sales, register, and then report the sales in those locations as well. So looking at what's available right now as ways to help with the sales tax compliance, one of the things that I want to talk about is the Streamlined Sales Tax program. Now, this program was created pre-Economic Nexus, was created back in 1999. The idea of Streamlined Sales Tax, this was created with the idea of helping businesses register in states that they were not really required to register in. Again, this is before Economic Nexus. So if a company had no physical buildings, no inventory, and no employees in a state, they could register, they didn't have to register, right? So 24 states came on board and they said, how do we encourage businesses that are not really required to register in my states to do so voluntarily? The idea is, let's pair up with a certified service provider. The states will compensate the provider for the cost of handling those transactions, and the states will receive the revenue from those companies that will voluntarily register in those states. Now, I mentioned there are 24 states doing that right now. Again, and the criteria to become the volunteer seller, again, is listed right there. No fixed place of business, less than $50,000 in property, and payroll as well. No employees in that state, unless you're paying less than $50,000 as well. So this is an easy way for companies to register in states and not having to accrue any cost of it. Another great advantage of this, the Streamlined Sales Tax program, is that if a state in the Streamlined Sales Tax program states, any of those 24 states, decides to do an audit to the company, they'll actually work with the provider, in this case, Avalara. They'll work with the service providers to work through the audit instead of you as the company. That will save you time, hassle, don't have to deal with the auditor in your offices or anything like that. A little more information about the Streamlined Sales Tax program is that other states are actually increasing this. Pennsylvania developed their own CSP program as well back in 2019. Other states are working to create their own program as well. The advantage of this is that if you have to register because of economic nexus rules, and the only thing that is triggering is just economic nexus and nothing else, you don't have employees, you don't have physical locations, you don't have inventory, the Streamlined Sales Tax program would be of great benefit to you. It's a single registration, single form. You can register in any of those 24 states. The cost of compliance in those states is all handled by Avalara. So it's really free sales tax services in any of those 24 states where you are a volunteer filer. And we can give you more information about this program. There's a great webinar, an hour-long webinar, talking about the advantages of the Streamlined Sales Tax program. We can help with an informal review if that's something that you want us to do. We can let you know exactly based on your business practices, based on your sales in other states, where you qualify as a volunteer filer in any of the states. And that's the key, right? Become a volunteer filer. So they're not looking at economic nexus, they're just looking at those three criteria that I mentioned before. Physical presence, like an inventory, physical locations, or employee. If you can qualify as a volunteer filer, it's free sales tax compliance for you. Talking about what we're offering for companies, how Avalara works is we have an integration, and NSA has actually created this link between your financial system and AvaTax. Instead of talking, let's talk about the process, right? The normal process of tracking taxability for a lot of businesses that are doing things manually is they'll create a tax table, and they'll have this tax table and they'll populate it with tax data for every single location that they're selling their products to. Now, keep it in mind that now you have to register and report in more states. That can become really complex. So companies are looking at automation. How does it work? Well, you have your financial system right here at the very bottom. Through NSA's interface, we can actually connect that tax your ERP system or any financial system that requires sales tax into AvaTax. Now, you don't have to worry about taxability rules. You don't have to worry about tax rates. If a state decides to change how things were taxed in one state, you don't have to worry about it. AvaTax has all that research done, all the tax rates, taxability rules, boundary information, all that is handled by AvaTax. So through this integration, you'll simply place an order through your ERP system, you save the order, and guess what? You have the sales tax already calculated into the system. We'll look at, is this customer taxable or exempt? Where's the products going to? What are the different line items? Maybe one of the line items is exempt from sales tax. Maybe you have a product and you have the freight for the product. Well, product may be taxable, the freight may be exempt from sales tax. All that is handled by AvaTax. You don't have to worry about the research or the calculation or the rate or anything whatsoever. You basically place the order, save it, and you have the sales tax into your ERP system. So that is the first thing that we'll do. There's a lot of reports available that will be available to you as well, based on your transactions. We'll also have an economic Nexus heat map where you will be able to track your sales that are going to any other state. So if you're only registered in 2 or 3 states, the system is going to track your sales outside of those 2 or 3 states, and will let you know when you're approaching a threshold into a new location. That way you're proactive about registering before you actually hit that trigger. The next thing that is going to happen on this is the certificate management, the ability for Avalara to track and manage exemption certificate documents. I don't know if you're aware, but certificates are not always good forever. States will vary how long a certificate is good for. In Florida, a resale certificate needs to be renewed every single year. In Colorado, I believe it's every 2 years where a resale certificate is valid for. So the time varies by state. So CertCapture will let you know when a certificate has expired. That way you can renew those certificates. Not only that, but it also has a built-in campaign engine. So you'll be able to build campaigns directly from this tool to renew those certificates directly from your customers. Your customers will get an email from you with a link. They can click on the link. It'll take them through a wizard. They'll be asked a series of questions about their business, where you're located, where you have Nexus, where are you selling? Are you selling for resale, manufacturing, whatever may be the reason? And the system is actually guiding the customer through creating the right document that they need. It also ensures that you're getting the right document every single time. Because how many of us do we get some other document that is not the exemption certificate document that we required? A lot of times we may end up with a business license or something else that is not what we need. Well, with CertCapture, you'll be able to track all that information. So you get the right document, you know when that document is going to expire, you have the ability to build campaigns and automatically renew those documents without too much involvement from your time. You can spend your time on other activities. And the final one is the filing, the ability for Avalara, since we already calculated and we know your taxable sales, we know your exempt sales, we know exactly what needs to be reported to the states. It's really finishing or ending the whole, finishing the compliance puzzle, right? The filing process. We'll be able to prepare, we'll be able to submit and pay the returns on your behalf every single time. If a state comes back to you and they have a question about a return, and they'll send a text notice, you can simply send those tax notices to Avalara, and we'll resolve those tax notices on your behalf. Again, this is the technology that we're talking about to make things easier. So now it doesn't matter what states have decides to change in the future. You have a process in place that will allow you to focus on your business and will handle everything related to the tax compliance process. Now, for our customers, we have a lot of tools available to you. There's a resource hub that gives you a lot of information about anything that is trending right now, a lot of information on COVID-19, what states are doing to help businesses, if there are deferred payments, reductions in rates, everything can be available through our COVID-19 resource hub. There's also, we have tools, tax research tools available to our clients, where if you're uncertain or how to tax certain products, or maybe if you're drop shipping to a new state and you're unsure if that state allows another state's exemption certificate, we have the tools to track that as well and let you know exactly when or how those items should be tracked. And if you're still unsure, if you still don't know, we do have an Ask an Expert feature in our research tool, where you'll be able to ask questions to an expert. and get the right answers with sourcing. So if you're unsure how to tax certain products or services or whatever you're offering, you can ask one of our experts. You can also research and look at answers already given to similar questions. Everything in a great, I like to call it almost like a Wikipedia and Google combined when it comes to tax research. We also have the commerce monitoring, where you'll be able to look at what's going on in your businesses and how it's tracking depending on the rules from the different states. And of course, the sales tax automation process. So again, very high level, we talked about the different solutions that are available to you, not just with automation, but also research. The other part is, as well, it's what do you do if you need to register in 3 or 4 more states based on economic nexus, or maybe you find that, oh, shoot, I should have registered in 3 locations because of my deliveries, right? Well, we can help with that as well. Avalara is a one-stop shop. We can help with the registration. We can help with previous historical data if you're unsure. This is a very popular item, which is basically a risk assessment, where if you're unsure where you need to register, we have a risk assessment tool. It's handled through our professional services. And we'll let you know exactly, hey, listen, you should register in these locations. This is your tax liability that you should have reported for the last 3 or 4 years. And this is something that we recommend doing based on that. Could be a historical registration, could be a voluntary disclosure agreement, could be something like that. So again, Avalara offers a one-stop location for all the compliance needs that you may have, automation, research, and whatnot. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. I don't know if we have questions. Evan or Brian, any questions that may come up during this process, or any questions that you may have?
Yeah, so Antonio, thank you so much for that presentation. So I do have a couple of questions. I would like to let everybody know, though, before I do that, and mention that there will be a copy of this recorded session that will go out to all the attendees. You'll get that within the next 48 hours. So, you know, be looking for that, please. So either Antonio or Evan, I'm not sure who's best to respond to this, but can you talk a little bit as to generally how the pricing works? Is there a monthly fee that clients sign up to pay? How long is the agreement for? And then how long does it typically take to get this solution set up and working with the Infor ERP solution?
Good question, Brian. Thank you. Our pricing, first of all, we never lock you into multi-year contracts. Never do that at Avalara. Our contract is 1 year. We want to earn your business year after year. Pricing is really based on the usage, how much you're going to use of AvaTax. So we look at your number of transactions that are going to states where you actually registered. If you're shipping to other locations that you're not registered, those transactions will not count towards your tier or level. So you only pay for usage. And again, it's not a multi-year contract. And how long it's the standard go live? Most customers go live in about 60 to 90 days. I would give myself an extra 20-day buffer just at the end of that as well, just for troubleshooting. But most of my customers are going live in about 90 days.
Wow, that sounds pretty fast. And again, I would invite anybody else that's on this call to either ask your questions in the Q&A chat box, or you can even open up your phones at this point in time. So please feel free to join in. One other question I had is, it became very apparent that there's been so many changes to taxes because of COVID, between the delayed taxes, the extensions, the refunds, etc. Can you just give me a rough, I guess, estimate or idea as to the level of changes that took place during 2020 as opposed to, I guess, any normal year in terms of taxes? Is it, you know, 100% more in terms of tax changes, or more than that? Can you just kind of give us an idea as to what we've seen?
Nothing from my side, Evan. I don't know if you guys are tracking this information. Normally you see changes to tax rules, product taxability. Those will be the common changes that you will see year to year. after COVID and after this economic nexus rules, things changed as to the definition of nexus. That became the most prevalent because businesses wanted to have reasons for companies to register. And that became the change, really. I mean, it's not really, we saw a 100% increase in changes. It wasn't like that. It was mainly the reasons of the changes. Economic nexus, COVID really affected things, and we'll be able to see those changes also. Now that things are starting to settle down, we're going to be able to see how long this, I guess I'm going to call it, helps or reliefs will be available, and then we'll see those changes come through as well.
Well, thank you very much for that. So again, please ask your questions along the way, but as you are used to with any of the NSA webinars, of course, we have a promotion, and I want to thank Avalara for having a very generous promotion here. And I'm going to hand that off to Evan to cover off what the promo is for Avalara.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks, Antonio, for the information on the webinar. If you would advance the slide, Brian, so I can make sure I get it correct, or
Yep.
Antonio, rather. So anybody that's interested in learning more about the solution, how maybe economic nexus rulings have affected your business, whether or not streamlined sales tax would be an applicable strategy for you, certainly reach out to Antonio, and let's get you on the phone and just kind of do a discovery of what you guys are doing today to manage tax compliance, and then Antonio can help connect the dots to what our solution might look like. If it makes sense and you're interested in moving forward, as an extra incentive for being an attendee of this webinar, we're offering 15 months for the price of 12, as well as 90 days deferred billing. So you can get started on the project, get it up and live without having to pay for it yet. So hope you'll take advantage at least of doing the exploration and finding out what we can do and how it might benefit your business.
Terrific, Evan. Well, thank you so much for that. And what I'd like to do is just wrap by saying we really appreciate the partnership with Avalara. It's been great with that partnership with NSA. We've had numerous clients that have taken advantage of it. And I would certainly invite anybody that's on this webinar to strongly consider Avatax and Avalara, and to take advantage of those promotions that are taking place now. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and wrap it up and thank our Avalara team for conducting the seminar today. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
And that wraps our session for today. Thank you.